Most Canadians think of $1 million as a retirement goal, something you're supposed to reach just in time to stop working. But what if the data shows that the typical Canadian family actually crosses that threshold well before retirement? And what if you're sitting at $200,000 or $300,000 right now, feeling behind, when in reality, you're ahead of the majority of people your age? That's the conversation we're having today. Because most of us are measuring ourselves against the wrong finish line, at the wrong time, and using numbers that have nothing to do with where we actually live. This isn't a video full of motivational fluff. Everything we're going to look at today comes from Statistics Canada's 2023 Survey of Financial Security, the most comprehensive look at Canadian household wealth ever conducted, having a massive sample size of 40,000 families. It was released in October 2024, and it paints a very different picture of Canadian wealth than most people expect. We're also going to draw on the Parliamentary Budget Office's 2025 High Net Worth Families database, which gets into the top of the wealth distribution more accurately than any other source in the country. These are not blog posts. These are not surveys of 500 people. This is the real data. Before we get into the milestones, let's establish where the middle actually is. The median net worth of Canadian families in 2023 was $119,700. That's the midpoint. Exactly half of all Canadian families have more, and exactly half have less. That number includes your home equity, your RRSP, your TFSA, your pension, and your car, minus everything you owe. Now, $519,700 sounds like a lot of money. But here's what that number hides. It includes seniors who have been building wealth for 5 or 6 decades. The under 35 crowd sits at a median net worth of $159,100. 35 to 44 age group is at $409,300. And families where the main earner is between 55 and 64, the ones who have had 30 or 40 years of working life behind them, have a median net worth of $873,400. So the $519,700 national median is real, but it's an average of very different life stages. Where you sit on that spectrum depends almost entirely on your age. Let's walk through the milestones you're probably here for. $100,000, $500,000, and the infamous $1 million. And let's look at when the typical Canadian family actually crosses each one. $100,000. The median net worth for Canadians under 35 is $159,100. That means the typical young Canadian family crosses $100,000 in net worth, somewhere in their late 20s to very early 30s. For context, in 1999, adjusted to today's dollars, that same age group had a median net worth of just $30,000. The game has changed significantly, and a lot of that change is driven by home equity in the families who have managed to buy. But here's the reality check. For families under 35 who don't own a home and don't have an employer-sponsored pension plan, the median net worth is just $27,000. So $100,000 by your early 30s is very achievable, but it is almost entirely a story about home ownership. If you're renting in your late 20s and building wealth through investments, you're doing something genuinely harder, and you may not hit that marker on the same timeline. $500,000. Looking at the 45 to 54 age group, the median net worth in 2023 was $675,800. The 35 to 44 group sits at $409,300. That tells us the typical Canadian family crosses $500,000 somewhere in their mid to late 40s, probably somewhere around 45 to 48. They move through that decade of significant wealth accumulation. Stop and sit with that for a moment. If you are 42 years old with a net worth of $350,000, you are not behind. You are right on the curve for where the typical Canadian family is heading. People at this level often don't feel wealthy because they're simultaneously carrying a big mortgage, paying for their children's activities, and watching their neighbors drive fancy new cars. $500,000 in net worth rarely feels like $500,000 because most of it is locked up in home equity you can't touch without selling. $1 million. This is where the numbers get genuinely interesting. When families hit the big million, the median net worth of senior families, those where the major income earners 65 or older, was $1,109,700 in 2023. For the 55 to 64 age group, the overall median sits at $873,400. But here's what that doesn't capture. Among 55 to 64-year-olds who own their home and have an employer pension plan, the median net worth was $1.4 million. So for the modal Canadian, the one who bought a home in their 30s, paid down the mortgage for 20 plus years, and contributed to a workplace pension, $1 million net worth typically arrives somewhere in their mid to late 50s, not at retirement. It actually comes well before it. That is a fact that would surprise most Canadians who have been conditioned to see $1 million as an aspirational retirement number, something to hit on the way out the door. The reality check here is stark, though, for 55 to 64-year-olds who rent and have no employer pension. A growing demographic as defined benefit plans disappear and housing costs exclude more families, so the median net worth is just $11,900. These two groups live in completely different financial realities, and they're the same age. $1 million milestone and an $11,900 milestone. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural divide. Here's where most people's mental model of Canadian wealth completely breaks down. When we talk about $100,000, $500,000, or $1 million in Canada, we tend to imagine a number you build up in a bank account or an investment portfolio. Save diligently, compound over time, arrive at the goal. That's the picture. But the Statistics Canada data tells a very different story. Real estate is the dominant force behind virtually every milestone we just discussed. Among all Canadian household assets in 2023, roughly 47 to 48% of the typical family's assets are in their principal residence alone. What that means is that for most Canadians, hitting $500,000 or $1 million is not primarily a savings discipline story. It is a real estate story. And this is where the numbers become regionally divided in a way that most Canadians from outside Toronto and Vancouver don't fully appreciate. In British Columbia, the median family net worth in 2023 was $773,500. In Ontario, $665,600. In Quebec, $371,000. In New Brunswick, $286,200. A family in Fredericton and a family in Burnaby, both with identical savings discipline, identical incomes, and identical financial habits, the only difference being the real estate market they bought into, will arrive at those wealth milestones on wildly different timelines. The Burnaby homeowner may have crossed $1 million by 50 simply because of where their house is located. Their counterpart in Fredericton may never cross it at all before retirement, through no fault of their own. This is not a personal finance story. This is a geography story and a policy story. And it is the piece of the Canadian wealth picture that almost never gets discussed when we talk about these milestone numbers. The Parliamentary Budget Officer found that in 2023, there were 4.4 million Canadian families with net wealth above $1 million, and the top 10% of families had a minimum net worth of $2 million. A large portion of those millionaires are people in their 50s and 60s in major urban markets who simply bought a house in the 1990s or early 2000s. They did not do anything exceptional with money. They bought early in the right place, and time did the rest. So if the numbers say that the typical Canadian family crosses $1 million before retirement, why doesn't it feel that way? Why do so many Canadians feel behind? Part of the answer is lifestyle inflation. As income and net worth grow through your 40s, expenses tend to grow right alongside them. A bigger home replaces the starter home. The vehicles get newer. The vacations get more expensive. Your reference group shifts upward. You're no longer comparing yourself to where you were at 28. You're comparing yourself to your neighbors, your colleagues, the people on your Facebook feed. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. It is the tendency for us to return to a baseline feeling of neutral no matter how much our circumstances improve. A net worth of $700,000 sounds enormous from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like a mortgage you're still paying down, a retirement account that's maybe half where it needs to be, and a car that's getting older. There is also a very real structural squeeze that is specific to Canada right now. The cost of living in our major cities has outpaced income growth for 2 decades. A household earning $120,000 in Toronto or Vancouver faces housing costs, childcare costs, and debt payments that can leave very little room to feel financially secure, even with a healthy net worth on paper. Feeling stretched is not a personal failure. It is the mathematical reality of living in one of the most expensive housing markets in the world. And there is one more factor that rarely gets talked about. That is the invisibility of non-liquid wealth. If $700,000 of your net worth is your home equity, you cannot spend it. You cannot pay your grocery bill with home equity. You can't fund your kids' university with it unless you sell or borrow against it. So people with significant paper wealth often genuinely feel cash poor because they are. Here's the honest reframe this video is trying to offer. The milestones of $100,000, $500,000, and $1 million are not finish lines you cross and then feel rich. They are indicators of trajectory. They are directional signals, not destinations. The more useful questions to ask yourself are, what percentage of my net worth is liquid and investable? What percentage is tied up in real estate I plan to hold for 30 more years? And what is my plan for converting illiquid wealth into income when I actually need it? If you are in your 40s and your net worth is sitting at $350,000 or $400,000, you are not behind the national median. You are right in line with the 35 to 44 year age range and on pace to cross the next major milestone in the decade ahead. The panic you feel when you read headlines about net worth is often calibrated against the wrong benchmark. A more grounded benchmark is, at every age, are your assets growing faster than your debts? Is your savings rate, even just a modest 10 to 15% of your income, consistent? Are you using registered accounts like your TFSA and RRSP to keep as much of your investment growth as possible? Those three things, sustained over time, are what actually move people through the milestones. Not a single breakout year, but consistency over decades. The data is clear. Most Canadian families do cross these thresholds. They just do it more slowly, more quietly, and more dependent on real estate than the personal finance world tends to acknowledge. If this video shifted how you think about where you actually stand financially, that's exactly what this channel is here to do. Next, we're going to dig into something closely related, the difference between a high income and actual wealth in Canada, because the data shows they are far less connected than most people assume. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you in the next one.